We're recording. Today is February 20th, 2019. My name is Elizabeth Faeder, and I am interviewing Diane Benjamin. Diane, how are you?
I'm terrific.
Great. I'm going to start by asking you first, what's your full name, and what were your parents' names as well?
Okay. My full name is Diane Faith. It was Wernick, Benjamin, and my parents, Paula Olenberg is her maiden name.
Okay.
And she had been married to my father, Sam Lewis, and then had been married to my stepfather, and at death, her name was Paula Greenblatt.
Okay, awesome. And go ahead, I'm sorry.
And my dad, of course, was Sam Lewis.
Is there any recognition with Louis AZA, or?
No. My father, actually, I took the name from relatives, the Lewison family in Philadelphia, where he was from.
Awesome. So your parents are so your dad's from Philadelphia?
Yeah.
And where was your mom from?
My mother was born in the Bronx, although she lived as a teenager in Russia.
Okay.
When her parents were going back to Utopia. She was what they call, David Horowitz would call a red diaper baby.
Okay, I gotcha. So if you don't mind me asking, where and when were you born?
Okay, I was born in the Bronx in January 21st, 1943, and actually I just celebrated my 76th birthday, and it's always a bittersweet birthday since my mother passed away because we shared the same birthday, January 21st.
Well, happy birthday to her, and may her memory be a blessing for sure.
Thank you.
Do you have any siblings, and if you so, what are their names?
Yes, my oldest sister is Beverly Lewis Russo, and my younger sister is Dr. Raina Lipkind, and she's in Florida.
If you could tell me, since you grew up in the Bronx, you said, what did your parents...
No, I did not grow up in the Bronx.
Oh no, I'm sorry.
I was born in the Bronx.
Okay, born in the Bronx.
When my mother remarried, we moved to Rockland County, New York, and I was basically raised on a 50-acre farm in New York State.
Thank you for correcting me, I apologize. What did your parents do for a living?
My mother had many, she actually started working after I got married, and but she had worked as a teenager at the Moscow Daily News, and she's been a prolific writer. She's an artist and played the piano, musician. I always felt like she was the most brilliant woman I knew, and I miss her really. I miss her a great deal. Every day I do. And but professionally, she worked for the Lamont Geological Observatory in New York for Columbia University. She worked for the Jewish Federation here in Dallas when she moved here to be helpful to me. And she had a lot of talents. She even baked for Marty's restaurant. Actually, she baked her famous matzo, I forgot what it's called, Mandelbrot.
Okay.
That they liked.
And what about your father?
My dad was a magnificent, had a beautiful opera voice, and he was trained for the opera, but he was a furrier in New York, had his own fur salon.
What was the name of it?
It was called Star, I think it was called Star Furs or something like that, because he used to sell to theatrical people and so forth.
Very cool.
And my stepfather was a pharmacist and a psychologist. And he was my stepfather for 18 years.
Can you tell me about the neighborhood you grew up in? Like, what were some of the schools you attended, and like just some like major like traits that you think like you can remember from your childhood in the neighborhood?
Well, I was raised in a predominantly Christian environment. My sisters and I were one of the few Jews in junior, senior high school, for example. My older sister and I, my kid sister, went to Valley Cottage Elementary. I was raised in an environment that was mostly Christian. It was the first Republican stronghold, I believe, outside of New York City, on the way to West Point, on the west side of the Hudson River. And I loved living in the country. We used to walk to, my bus was about a quarter of a mile from my house. It was very rustic. We had deer, we had coming up to our windows. And it was a beautiful environment in which to live. As far as my family belonged to the Nyack Synagogue, Temple Israel, where actually Cantor Crone was a cantor at that same synagogue. It was went to Nyack High School, and while most of my friends went down to St. Anne's to some type of a religious, they had religious training, my sisters and I would go to study hall. Very few of us remained, while the majority of, I believe, that community were Catholic.
Mm-hmm.
And I did not feel that, I never felt any anti-Semitism, although I always gravitated more to being with my Jewish friends from, let's say, Spring Valley, New York, which was a strong Jewish community close to where I was raised.
Mm-hmm.
And most of my friends were not Jewish, and yet I longed to be more in a more Jewish environment. And so I went to New York City after I graduated high school, and I went to City College, and also I took some courses at the Jewish Theological Seminary in New York and the Art Students League, because I was also an art student, and I wanted to be an art teacher.
What made you want to go into that kind of field and that kind of career path?
Art.
Mm-hmm.
My aunt was a fabulous artist. My mother was a wonderful artist. And I just gravitated to that interest.
Mm-hmm.
I loved painting, I loved art. And actually my older sister is also very artistic, and my nephew is a very well-known artist as well. He's written books and so forth. My nephew David Anson Russo is a very popular artist.
What was your aunt's name?
Excuse me?
The art. You said your aunt kind of contributed to your passion for art. What was her name?
My Aunt Faye, she had a 100-acre farm in Hightstown, New Jersey.
Mm-hmm.
And we used to go there often, and she was a very, very prolific painter.
Mm-hmm.
And I have in every room of my home today, I have at least one of her paintings. And I remember her dearly. She had sons, and my mother had daughters. And so she was a dramatic influence upon me, because I think I was like her daughter.
Mm-hmm. Of course, yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, my Aunt Faye, I love very much.
Faye, what was her last name? Faye.
Faye Soifer.
Faye Soifer.
Soifer was her last name. Her husband was a chemistry professor, and Soifer is from the Hebrew word sofer. Probably was a descendant of a scribe. You know, the scribes are called soferim.
Tell me this. You said that you grew up in a predominantly Christian neighborhood. You hanged out.
My family were basically secular Jews.
Yes.
And I gravitated more to wanting and desiring a more an anchor in my life.
Yeah.
My parents were divorced, and I wanted to. I felt very comfortable in a more Jewish, religious environment, and that's what I gravitated towards going to the seminary, where I met my first husband.
Fantastic. And so when you said you had a lot of friends in another, it was called Spring
Valley.
Yes. So
Spring Valley, New York. Some of my high school friends were from Spring Valley area, which had more Jews. But I was kind of a loner in high school. I had a stepfather. He was a psychologist, and he was not a good person. And unfortunately, and I'm going to say this on film, he molested me and my older sister. He married a woman with 2 children, and in those days, you did not talk about these things.
Of course.
So my mother finally divorced him.
Oh, goodness, that.
Okay.
I'm sorry about that. I didn't mean to bring that up. You're gonna story. I'm sorry that we can just go
Well,
right
it's
over
important.
that.
It's important for
Of
people
course.
to come forward and recognize when there are ills in society, and
Mhm.
when people hide behind, whether it's a religious cloak, or whether it's behind a profession,
Mhm.
or even behind a beard, which is a mask.
Of course.
I think it's important that people are forthright, and in order to eradicate the ills of society, you have to face them.
Of course. What I wanted to ask overall is, do you believe that hanging out with your friends in that area, were they part of like any youth group, like the neighborhood youth organization or Nifty?
Yes, actually, I belong to Nifty.
Okay, fantastic.
Because I was raised in a Reform synagogue.
Okay.
But in New York, the Reform synagogues were more practicing of observance of Jewish rituals and so forth. Farther west you got, they were different. The Reform movement, let's say in Texas, is not like the Reform movement in New York. New York, you're more surrounded by more exposure to Jewish observances and so forth. So I would imagine when I was growing up, the Reform movement was more like conservative.
Absolutely. So, where did you, I think you already say this, but if you could mind just going a little bit farther with me, where did you go to school? What was the name of your high school? Like what?
High school was Nyack High School,
Nyack High
Nyack,
School.
Nyack, named after the Nyack Indians in the Hudson River Valley.
Fantastic.
And we were raised in a 200-year-old home, which probably the Revolutionary War was
Okay.
fought on my property where I was raised. And as a matter of fact, to this day, after the property was subdivided, there are 2 streets named in honor of my sister Raina Lane and Raina Court in Valley Cottage, New York.
Very cool.
But, and then I went on to City College, CCNY, it's now City University of New York, I guess. And I studied art and art education, and then I also had a scholarship to Brooklyn Museum in conjunction with Long Island University, but I chose City College. And also my mother's best friend was the registrar at the Jewish Theological Seminary, Jerry Rosenfield, and she encouraged my mother to have me take some classes at the seminary because she knew that I was gravitating towards more of a Jewish identity.
And you felt very strongly about that, and I take it your parents fully supported you with regards to that.
My mother thought that that would be, fine with her. It was enriching, and but she wanted me to be. She would have liked had I been an art teacher. I was studying. Actually, I wanted to study to be architecture, but I was discouraged because in that day and age, very few women were accepted as architects as well as Jewish women. So being an artist and loving art, I decided I was going to be an art teacher. And then I was at the seminary, and that's where I met my husband, who was a rabbinical student at the seminary.
What's the name of your husband?
My first husband was Nissim Wernick, Rabbi Nissim Wernick, and he held a position here in Dallas, Texas, in Shereth, Israel.
So, we'll get to how you got from New York to Dallas in a little bit.
Okay.
But I guess I think that you were the president of the B'nai Zion Foundation.
Right.
What is the mission of that organization, and what was your time? How many years were you there? When did you start? When did you end? And how did you become involved with that organization in the first place?
Well, first of all, I have been very, very devoted to the Jewish community here in Dallas, and actually throughout my adult life, I have, as I said, gravitated to enjoying my heritage and feeling that I had a mission here on this earth to promote the well-being of Jewish people. I have 36 members of my family that were perished in the Holocaust. And my grandfather, Frank Olenberg, had a dramatic influence in my life. He was a writer. He was, of course, very much of from a Hasidic background in Europe, but in America he helped to start the labor unions. He was a strong socialist, communist, I would say, because he picked up his family, sold his property in Peekskill, New York, to uproot his family to go back to what he thought was utopia. And luckily they came back before the war, but my mother and her sisters had an opportunity to see their grandparents and family in Poland before they were tossed into the ovens. But I personally had devoured everything my grandfather would tell us in his broken Yiddish English about his family, his life, as well as my mother was very well read, and she was an activist herself. And I remember as a child how she would be very much against the killing of the Rosenbergs, who were claimed to have been spies. And when I would come home from school, she would be watching the McCarthy trials on TV and felt that that was a very wrongful blight in history. So I was raised with my mother specifically, who was an ardent activist. When there was an ill, she felt that if we did not stand up and speak up for any of the ills of society, that we were an accomplice to the crime.
Do you think, so what, can I ask you this, what were the name of your grandparents on your?
My grandfather was Frank Olenberg. His mother's maiden name was Gilner. Okay. Now, the Gilner is very important for my family because most of my family are in Georgia. It is my understanding that my family were remnants of the Spanish Inquisition. And it was told that my family came in through Georgia, some of my family, the family that didn't go to Poland, but through the Spanish Inquisition, the Jewish people went to Portugal, that was more receptive to the Jews after the Spanish Inquisition, and then they went eastward to Holland because the Dutch West India gave the Jews burger rights, which is citizenship, and then family went east to Poland, and yes, some of my family went to Latin America. And the family that went to Latin America, the Gilner family, came into Savannah, Georgia in the 1700s on the William and Sarah ship. And the governor, Oglethorpe, would not allow the Jews to disembark because he was an anti-Semite. And then, lo and behold, a plague befell Savannah, and he realized there were Jewish doctors on board. So apparently some of my family came into Georgia at that time because of that incident. But in any event, I have family in Georgia. You asked for my grandfather's maiden. My grandfather's name was Olenberg. It was Hollenberg, and before that in Spain, my grandfather said it was Halevi. So
your mother always, go ahead, I'm sorry.
And my father's family was from, my grandfather was from Kiev, and my grandmother was from Bessarabia, which is Moldova.
Wow, yeah. You have very, very, very diverse background with your
regular
family.
smorgasbord.
No, that's great. That's the best type of thing to have. But I can just tell, so your mother obviously, her grandfather and her history, she definitely carried that with her. So I take it she was very, she made a very, understanding and made you and your siblings understand how important it was to keep intact your Jewish identity,
yes,
especially in a world with so much was going on and things like that. So that's fantastic. So I take it then when you started working with the B'nai Zion Foundation, that was something that you kind of brought over, that kind of pushed you to go, that,
Well, how that happened, actually, I've been a strong supporter of Hadassah. and I've been on the Chevra Kadisha after my divorce from my husband, the rabbi. I was married to him for 16 years, and I have 4 children from that marriage. Very proud of my children, who are all leaders in their community. I gravitated, when I was divorced, having done volunteer work and having taught in Hebrew schools when I was a Rebbetzin, I needed to make a living. And so I wanted to do something in volunteer work that would require the least amount of time but had the greatest impact. So I joined the Chevra Kadisha of my synagogue, which is a holy society that prepares the deceased for the funerals. And that enabled me to be a mom, where I could do that early in the morning if I was called upon, and then I could devote my days to making a living for my 4 children. And I also had always been a life member of Hadassah, and I was an ardent Hadassah a member and supporter, and I was vice president of membership, and then vice president of fund development. And I really valued my relationship with Hadassah until I found that the mission of Hadassah was somewhat diluted with politics, and I'm a very strong right-winger, so I did not appreciate some of the philosophies of Hadassah, but I did value the incredible medical research and technology, and I still am a 4th-generation life member of Hadassah, and I was given several awards. But in 2007, I received a call asking me if I would be an honoree for B'nai Zion. Now, I had been a member of ZOA, Zionist Organization of America. As a matter of fact, my first husband founded the first ZOA organization here in Dallas, which we called the Lou Creditor ZOA, in honor of Lou Creditor, who's deceased, but he was a very fine leader in our community. And the ZOA metamorphed into B'nai Zion. That's another story. But the Jewish Federation here in Dallas had promoted in the 80s, or maybe even the 70s, the Oslo Accord, and then the roadmap. And I was not in agreement with Land for Peace for Israel. So I kind of was happy that B'nai Zion, a organization, not political, because it treats all people, had invited me to be an honoree. And with Pastor Stephen, oh my goodness, all of a sudden my mind is, anyway, the pastor who was at the Lover's Lane United Methodist Church. So he and I were asked to be honorees for B'nai Zion, and I appreciated the good work that the hospital did for Northern Israel and served Northern Israel, whereas Hadassah is a very big institution, and out of Jerusalem, I felt that the B'nai Zion Hospital was basically unsung, and had a very vital role. It was over 100-year-old hospital that served all of Northern Israel and located in Haifa. It overlooks the bay, which houses Israel's refineries, and is targeted by Lebanon to the northeast, and actually had been the recipient of destruction, some destruction during the 2006 Lebanon War. But anyway, in 2007, I was asked to be an honoree, and then I was basically, after I accepted that, I felt that to accept an honor from an organization, I wouldn't be a hit-and-run driver. I would stay involved. Otherwise, why would I take on, this special honor? if I wasn't going to be committed to its cause. And so I stayed and I helped with the organization, and eventually I was asked to be president. So I took that role on, I believe it was in 2000 and, I don't know, 15?
Yeah.
So here it is 2019, and I just handed over the gavel to very, very capable John Pizer.
Very nice. So congratulations. That's fantastic. Thank you for supplying yourself to that organization. That's a mitzvah. Let me ask you, so we talked about your first husband, and then how did you come from New York to Dallas? Can you expand on that a little bit?
Well, my husband, when we were married in 1962, December 18th, 1962, and he was ordained in 1966. While we were married, he had a student pulpit in New Jersey, and then and I continued. I worked at the seminary also, and at the Jewish Theological Seminary, and I was secretary to the registrar and to the dean of students, and I was taking classes, and then I was also rushing to take classes at City College in New York. And then I was teaching Hebrew school, and when my husband was ordained, we got, he received a position in Union, New Jersey. Our first congregation was Temple Israel in Union, New Jersey, and my son Stuart Wernick was born in Hackensack, New Jersey, the home of the New York Giants. And we had a pulpit there for a couple of years, and then he had a better pulpit offered to him in Salt Lake City, Utah. So my second son, Bruce, was born in Salt Lake City, and my ex-husband received his PhD from Brigham Young University while we were in Salt Lake, and it was a wonderful experience. The Mormons were wonderful to us, and because my ex-husband got his PhD from Brigham Young University, they offered us, the sun, the moon, and the stars, and we converted, but of course we were certainly not going to do that. But we had a very wonderful experience living in Salt Lake City, and I enjoyed it. And then from Salt Lake, we had a pulpit opportunity to move to Atlanta, Georgia. And since most of my family was in Georgia, I really enjoyed that. So we went to Cherith Israel, actually, in Atlanta. And then my husband taught at Emory, and he had this pulpit at Cherith Israel, which is a conservative synagogue in Atlanta. And then from Atlanta, we went to, he lost his position, actually, in Atlanta. I don't know. Unfortunately, my husband had a tendency, when things were going very well, he kind of put a wrench in the works. He had some personality conflicts and problems. But I was 8 months pregnant with my third son, and I'll never forget, I was in the synagogue. I was actually in the supermarket, and I was pregnant, and I was crying. And Rabbi Ishai, who was from the Spanish-Portuguese synagogue in Atlanta, said, "Rebbitzin, why are you crying? Why are you crying?" I said, "Well, here I am 8 months pregnant, and I don't know where we're going to go because my husband lost his position in Atlanta." So he says, "Don't worry, the Lord will provide." And lo and behold, the next day he had a pulpit opportunity to move to Baltimore. So my third son, Barry Wernick, was born in Baltimore, Maryland, and he had a student pulpit. He had a pulpit as an assistant to Rabbi Rosenblatt, whose father was the famous cantor Yesler Rosenblatt. And so we stayed in Baltimore, I say, long enough to have my baby. Barry Wernick was born in Sinai Hospital in Atlanta, in Baltimore, which I'm proud to say is south of the Mason-Dixon line. And we were there for actually just 9 months, and then he had another opportunity to come to Dallas, Texas.
Very, very
So
nice.
that's why we're here, because Cherith Israel had an opportunity Sheriff Israel here in Dallas, and my husband applied for the position, and a wonderful, wonderful former president of Sheriff Israel, Saul Levine, of blessed memory, came to Baltimore. I had just had the baby, and so I wasn't able to come for the interview here to Dallas.
Mm-hmm.
So Saul Levine came to Baltimore to interview me,
Mm-hmm.
and he said it was my chocolate cake that cinched the deal. So
Your sons, you said how many children?
I actually had 4 sons, and when we came to Dallas, my 4th son was born eventually in 1977, because we moved here in March of 71, and Barry was actually 2 months old when we moved here, and my baby, Diane Wernick, is named after my grandpa Frank,
Wow.
and Frank Olenberg. And Ephraim was born in Texas, and that's what brought me here.
So 4 boys, and do you have any daughters?
No, I don't have daughters, but I have wonderful daughters-in-law.
Oh, fantastic.
And my husband, Jerry Benjamin, who I'm married to now 32 years.
Mhm.
I was divorced here in Dallas.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, my husband was the Rabbi Wernick, was a controversial person.
Mhm.
He was dynamic, had a lot of charisma. He was 6'4" and very handsome and athletic. He played basketball here at the JCC, and he played the piano. He's had a lot of wonderful attributes. Unfortunately, he was self-destructive, and he left. He abandoned myself and my 4 boys and left us penniless, and it was a blight. It was a real sad time for my family, and it's a story in itself that people tell me I should write about. But anyway, my mother always said every knock is a boost.
Mhm.
So, and she said, Diane, don't worry, one day you're going to send him a thank you note. So I immediately went to work. I had several jobs as an artist. I was doing menus, I was doing signs, I was doing calligraphy, and the Jewish community was surprised that I would venture to study real estate, and I would go to Rabbi Opseyer's backyard, and he would quiz me and test me on my real estate, so I'd be prepared for my test, and I'd study with him. Real estate, not Torah. And I got my license and became Rookie of the Year for my company at the time was Paula Stringer. Actually, the first person that held my license, I'm going to give credit to Mitchell Rosansky, who was a city councilman in Dallas.
Okay.
His mother was an old-time realtor, Bert Realty, and she was my first sponsor as a realtor. So I
Wow.
want to give credit to her, Helen Rosansky.
Absolutely. So, what year did you start going to the real estate?
So I got my real estate license in 1979. I was divorced in 78.
And you were here in Dallas?
In Dallas.
Okay.
And I stayed, and people said to me, are you going to stay in Dallas? And I said, well, why not? Why should I? I didn't do anything wrong. And I told my sons, I said, you're not going to feel in any way embarrassed or humiliated or anything when we go to synagogue. I want you to hold your heads up high and walk down the front row center aisle of the synagogue, because you know, your father loved you the best way he knew how, and what he did to himself, and we are going to move forward with our lives. That was, you know, my mother taught us. She had gone through a lot of difficult times herself, and she taught us how to not survive, but not to be victims. Not to be victims. I didn't want my boys to feel victimized.
Of course. So go ahead, I'm so sorry.
So we just had a dramatic sense of, you know, what was, and you move on, move forward, and you make lemonade out of lemons.
So let me ask you this. So, you know, I can tell already that your mother's father made her understand how important it was to identify, you know, to be proud of who you were, proud of your Judaism. Your mother made you understand, and your siblings understand, be proud of you, or be proud of your Judaism, be proud of your culture. Do you think, after everything that's happened, did you like implement that to your sons? Like, were your sons part of BBYO or NIFTY when they were here in Dallas? And how did you feel how important it was to implement those lessons that were tossed down throughout generations to your kids?
Okay, first of all, my boys were like little princes here in Dallas because they were not only the rabbi's son of a very prominent, prestigious congregation, the plum of the Southwest, if not the entire United States, Shereth Israel, was a plum synagogue, and they were treated royally. And we had, they weren't spoiled, but we had a membership of the Colombian Club at that time, and I used to bring my children with me to the Colombian Club while most of the women left their kids home with their maids, because at that time everyone had a live-in maid. It was very inexpensive. And I used to take my live-in with me to the club with the kids, and I kept them at my side, and they were, after my divorce, I told my sons that they had no time for drugs or alcohol or any problems that some of these kids would, juvenile delinquency, I said, you got to get out and work, and I trained them to make their beds as they were getting out of them, and to be productive. And my son Stuart, who one time was a little prince, and had two redheaded sons. They were cute to look at too. The next day he was washing the toilets at the JCC to help put bread on my table. So, and he was working at age 14 at Haagen-Dazs, mopping the floors and stuff. So my sons were taught to have a strong work ethic and to be responsible for their own actions. And I told them, one of you will be, if not all of you, will be leaders in the community one day and make the name Wernick mean something in this community, and perhaps you'll even be a president of your synagogue. So aim high, and my mother always said, be like a grave digger, start at the top, and just aim high and be a success. So Stuart was president of the, in high school he was treasurer of the senior class at Hillcrest High School, and Bruce was president of the senior class at Hillcrest High School, and Barry was president of the student body at St. Mark's, and Ephraim went on also at St. Mark's helping the coaches. He was also one of the star football players at St. Mark's School, and they wrote about him because he wouldn't play on Erev Yom Kippur. And yet he was one of the stars of the football team, and he's now a federal prosecutor in Washington, D.C. He puts terrorists in prison, and Obama took them out. I want that on the record. And then also my third son, Barry, has been a shaliach for ZOA in Israel. He lived in Russia, he lived in Moscow, and he helped the CIA, and he helped to reestablish Jewish communities in Russia. He speaks Russian fluently, and he also speaks Hebrew. And he is an attorney in Dallas. He's also a movie producer, and he's done a movie with Judd Nelson from The Breakfast Club, and he's most recently did, unfortunately, for his wife's sister who was murdered in Bonham, Texas. He did a program for 48 hours, an unsolved murder mystery. Wow. And then my oldest son, Stuart, is a very, very successful businessman. He's an investment banker here in Dallas, and he has 3 children. All of his girls went to Akiba and Yavna, and one lives in Israel right now, and one studying in Israel will be going to the University of Michigan, and my other granddaughter is very proud of my children and my grandchildren. She's studying in Singapore to be an engineer, and she'll be going back to the University of Maryland. And then the oldest daughter graduated Yavna, and she's now a CPA in New York. And my husband Jerry and I have, Jerry has 3 boys as well, and that's another story because I was very blessed to have been introduced to him.
Forget that, brings me to our next question, so very convenient. So how did you meet Jerry?
How did I meet Jerry?
Yes, tell me.
Okay, Well, I had everyone at Cherith Israel Sisterhood fixing me up when I was a single lady.
Yeah.
And I was very, very blessed that I had people who were caring about me, most especially Irvin Donsky of blessed memory, who was past president of Cherith Israel in the Federation. He was like a father hen or whatever.
Yeah.
He would, if he didn't approve of somebody I went out with, he would let me know. He'd call me into his office and say, I don't want you going out with this person. And he was just a wonderful, wonderful person, and his daughter, Marilyn Paylett, is a dear friend. But I'll never forget the Donskys. Francis and Irvin Donsky were very caring of me. And most of the sisterhood at Cherith Israel, they all had a cousin and uncle or this or that. They were always fixing me up. So I was never without a date. But the thing is that my children were the most important people in my life, and I was very selective. And I did have a second marriage, a short-term second marriage, to someone from Houston, Texas, a Texan, and unfortunately that did not work out well. I married for the wrong reasons, and then I was single, and Rebecca Greenblatt, who lives here in Dallas, she introduced my husband to me. She had given him a list of names of Jewish women, 5 names, and he called them all except for me, and then he asked Rebecca for another list, and she said, did you call everybody? He says, well, I didn't call Diane because I think she was too religious for me. So although Jerry belonged to Faeder Israel and raised his children there, and he came from a kosher home, and he was knowledgeable about Judaism, because when I did date, I was very concerned also that I would have a home that was a kosher home. That was important to me, and because that's how I raised my children, and that I would marry Jewish, and that whoever I married would have common interests with me. So anyway, I had, so Rebecca told Jerry that she wasn't going to give him another list until he called me. So Jerry, being a very, very honest person, not very honest, he is honest, you either are or you're not, he can't tell a lie, and so he decided he'll call me on Shabbat, on Saturday, thinking I'll either be in shul or I won't answer the phone. So he called me on Saturday, and it just so happens I answered the phone. And he asked me out and for Sunday evening to go to dinner at Gershwin's. And I accepted, and we had a very long, nice conversation, and then he asked me out again. And we basically closed the place, we were talking, and he asked me out again. I said, no, I can't go out with you. So he said, well, why not? So I said, well, first of all, you have a New York accent. So he said, so where are you from? I said, New York. And then I said, well, another thing is you're a salesman, and I don't go out with salesmen. So he said, so what do you do? So I said, oh, I sell houses. So that was strike 2. And then I said, besides which, you're too short. I don't go out with anyone under 6 feet tall.
Oh, wow.
So he says, well, and then he said, well, why do you look so pensive? I said, well, I was just thinking about all the short guys I could have been going out with. You know, I had been sabotaging myself. And anyway, so we went out again, and we had a lot of shared interests. And he is the father of 3 fine young men.
Great.
Andrew Benjamin, David Benjamin. Andrew lives in Seattle. David lives in San Antonio, he's an attorney, and Richard Benjamin. And my husband Jerry had unfortunately suffered a tragedy where his first wife, who he loved, Naomi Benjamin, and he had taken a young boy into their home to give him a safe home. He had been child abused, and unfortunately he murdered Naomi.
I'm sorry to hear that.
And I don't know if you're familiar with that story, but in any event, it happened in 1980, and Naomi was a beautiful lady, and she was president of Akiba PTA.
Mm-hmm.
And Jerry's oldest son actually is the first, chronologically and alphabetically, to have graduated from Akiba Academy.
Wow.
And our sons kind of knew each other through Akiba. So that was nice that we shared a concern about Jewish education for our children. And anyway, so we got married at the Fairmont. And Jerry unfortunately had his own tragedy with losing his wife.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized that when I was dating, that sadly, most of the men I dated were divorced. And they had lost their life estate to their exes, and they were mean and bitter, and they really weren't good fathers. And one of the things that I loved about Jerry was the fact that he's a very good father to his children, and I felt if he'd be good to his, he'd be good to mine.
And he was. And he is.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. It's for sure. Just no joke. And that's fantastic. It's a great. He sounds like a great man. I'm glad you guys are together for that. That's fantastic. I'm going to ask a couple more questions and we'll be done. You've been through a lot, and you've done so many things to the Jewish community, and you've contributed so much, and you've done you've been a mother, a wife, and you've been a contributor to the Jewish community, Jewish education, and just making sure that your boys and, everyone you can know is to be proud of who they are, wherever they came from, just be proud and don't be afraid to stand up for what you believe in, what you stand for. Right. So, time has passed, and so tell me one thing you want most people to remember about you, if there's anything. If people could go in the archives at the Historical Society and look at your video, what is one thing you want people to remember about you, to your contribution to the Jewish community?
Well, I think that perhaps I look to God. I'm very, very blessed that I have a strong faith, mm-hmm. And my religion has been important in my life. I feel that my faith in a better tomorrow has always been present, and that I feel that it's unfortunate. I see our country is going away from religion. And I feel very comfortable in the presence of strong Christians who know the Bible. Mm-hmm. And I'm very disappointed and sad when I see people of the Jewish faith who forgot that they're supposed to be a light unto the nations, mm-hmm. and that they are worshiping false idols, mm-hmm. And it's very painful to me. So what would I want as to be remembered as a person who is God-fearing, mm-hmm. and who has raised her children to be a light unto the nations.
Great. Last two questions. You've been very successful in your field of business and real estate. What is, for future people graduating, for future people in general who are wanting to get into any sort of a field, a business or field, and what advice would you like to leave for future entrepreneurs, for future business people?
Well, I've been very, very happy to say that I have mentored young people, mm-hmm. and I have this will be my 40th year. I'm celebrating my 40th year as selling real estate. I'm still working, and I'm mentoring a young lady now who went through a divorce. She has children, mm-hmm. and I'm so proud of her. And I encourage her to get her real estate license. And I think the best thing you can do is to help a younger person or another person to be successful in. And what is a success? And that is somebody who loves what they do. Mm-hmm. I think regardless whether you could be a poet, a doctor, you have to enjoy what you do. I love selling real estate. I love all of my clients, just about all of my clients have become my friends. Mm-hmm. And I take real joy in the fact that I help them profit And as a Jew, we don't glorify poverty. In order to help another person, you have to be able to have the wherewithal. So I'm encouraged to see that I've helped some young people who have become successful realtors, and I'm really feeling good about that. I don't consider it competition, because to me, competition is healthy, and that's what this country has created with, you know, the opportunity to compete and make yourself better. When you know that somebody is out there who's good, you try and be better. And free enterprise, I'm all for it. So what can I say? As far as my profession, I just am happy that I've become a realtor, helping people take a house and turn it into a home. And and when I go through the different houses, it's interesting. Some people say, oh, don't work with Jews, Diane. I love working with my people. If I cannot help my own, why should a stranger? You know, that's the way I feel. And I love working with Jewish people. I work a lot with Christian people because they like my value system. And they know that I will be there and protect them and not just be good at what I do, but I will, they know they can trust me.
Absolutely.
And it's more important to be competent and to know what you can do.
Of course.
You know?
Absolutely. Last question for you. And thank you again for all this. I think we've talked about in this interview, and I've read on a couple times, you're very proud of where you come from. Your family, your grandparents, your kids, everything you've been through. But you've always maintained, we've basically said that you're very proud of your culture and your religion. And considering everything for this next generation of teenagers and everyone going through this next generation of future people going into the world, what is one piece of advice you would like to leave for them in regards just to whatever they want to do in this life and how they want to represent themselves? What is one piece of advice you want to leave for the next generation?
You know, my mom lost an eye in a freak accident, and yet she used to drive all the ladies to choir practice at Temple Emmanuel late at night. They were afraid to drive. They didn't know she had one eye. Yeah. And she never felt that she was handicapped. My mother lost a breast. She had breast cancer. And when doctor asked her, what do you want, mastectomy, a lumpectomy, whatever, my mother said, you know, we're all terminal. And I'm not a breast, I'm a person. And I'm going to put my grandson's basketball socks in my bra and let's move on. And my mother had a very wonderful spirit and encouraging. And she taught me not to give up. You never fail unless you stop trying, okay? And I guess one of her mottos, which I put on her memorial, when I sent out thank you notes, because she was buried at Cherith, Israel, was one of her favorite expressions was, what is the biggest room in the house? The room for improvement. So she always strove to be better and inculcated that in me. And I appreciate it. I miss my mom.
You sound like a fantastic woman.
She was.
So, at the end of the day, that's if anything, you would implement that to the future generation. That is, there's always room for improvement, no matter what step you take, right?
Right.
All right, Diane, thank you so much for doing this today. We really appreciate this, and this will be a great contribution to the archives.
Oh, well, thank you. You did a wonderful job. You really had me gabbing quite a bit.
And that's what I need to do. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
My pleasure.